This is Bernie Sanders, a Democratic candidate for president in 2016 and once again a major contender for president in the upcoming 2020 election. Bernie Sanders is also a long-serving independent senator for Vermont. So, that means when we are looking at his economic policies, we have more than just campaign promises to go off. We have a long and tenured history in politics. Which brings us neatly onto the big disclaimer for this video. As with all of the candidates we have explored before, and all of the candidates I intend to explore before the 2020 election, we will just be looking at Bernie's economic policies. His plans for office could be replacing the stars and stripes with a hammer and sickle within the first 100 days, and he would still get the economics explained tick of approval if he has sound economic policy. With all of that out of the way, Bernie is a self-described democratic socialist, which is a big claim to make as a career politician in the United States, a country that takes great pride in its freewheeling capitalistic market. But that's the first big distinction that needs some clarity. Socialism tends to conjure up imagery of Soviet-era soup lines, gulags, and inefficient state-run industry. But surely this isn't the future Bernie Sanders is advocating for. To best understand his policies, perhaps it is best to understand his self-appointed label. From face value, democratic socialism is basically mixing economic socialism with political democracy. The recognised structure calls for a collectively owned and controlled means of production that goes to benefit all participants in a society. A big distinction is that the philosophy of democratic socialism actually rejects self-described socialist states like the USSR, North Korea, or China, or any other state that subscribes to the MLM model. Now, we have explored MLMs before on this channel, but that was a different type of MLM. Here, we are talking about Marxist, Leninist, Maoist policies, which pertain more to entire economic systems and have only been slightly less financially devastating for their participants than the other type of MLM. A lot of critics of Bernie Sanders point to examples of failed states like the USSR, North Korea, and even more recently Venezuela as an example of a type of system that he is trying to inflict upon the United States. But this isn't entirely fair. Democratic socialism is generally characterized as the following: a limit to the accumulation of private property, most staunchly noted by Bernie Sanders with his very vocal criticism of modern billionaires, extensive publicly funded assistance programs for people like students, people without health insurance, or anybody else that is financially vulnerable, and government regulation of the economy. This is often something that makes a lot of people very angry, but it basically exists in pretty much any economy in the world today. It just depends to what degree. You can roughly line countries, economic schools of thought, and political ideologies up along a line of left to right. Now, of course, this is purely subjective, and the exact positioning can be argued to no end. But at the very left, you tend to have centrally controlled authoritarian states like the USSR, North Korea, and a few other countries that still subscribe broadly under the banner of Marxist communism. Of course, in these states, almost everything is dictated by the government. Food is rationed, jobs are assigned, and prosperity comes from service to the state, or more likely, inter-party collusion. On the other end of the spectrum, you pretty much have anarchy. No rules, no government, and everything is for a price. You want roads, schools, protection, or utilities? Pay for it. With what money? Well, obviously not this government money here. You pay for it with whatever you think has value. Bitcoins, gold, Nuka-Cola caps, it doesn't matter so long as people are willing to exchange goods and services for it, it's currency. No real examples of this exist because it is unlikely that this type of system would even be able to organise into such a way as to be considered a nation. Obviously, between these two extremes exist most economies today, bunched up towards the centre, with some level of government control and some level of free enterprise in a kind of Goldilocks zone. Not so much control that innovation and free enterprise is stifled, and just enough government control to ensure that basic functionality is maintained in order to conduct business. Now, for the most part, I really try to avoid the left-right political economic spectrum thing, because for the most part, it is pretty clunky. There are so many ways to draw up where everything fits in based on any number of definitions. There are straight lines, horseshoes, 2D charts, 3D charts, and whatever this thing is. But for the sake of clarity, sometimes a visual is necessary. Bernie Sanders effectively wants to move the US economy from here to here, where more control is put into essential industries like healthcare, roads, and social welfare, more limits are put onto conspicuous accumulations of wealth, and more services are offered to financially vulnerable individuals. It really is not a change as severe as most people would believe in the grand scheme of things. You will still be able to buy your Starbucks in the morning, but you're going to be served by someone earning a slightly higher minimum wage. You will still be able to buy your first home, but there are likely to be taxes levied on individuals buying their 31st home. you will still be able to leave your family home to your children in your estate, but there will be taxes levied on leaving the family jet. You will still be able to see your regular doctor and get world-class treatments if you have insurance to pay for it, but nobody will be denied a doctor because they cannot afford it. Bernie Sanders has always been a staunch supporter of a universal healthcare system. Such a system would be entirely funded through taxes and available to all residents of a country regardless of their income, insurance status, or pre-existing conditions. This is known as a single-payer system, which means that there is only one single entity paying for the whole system. In this case, the government. Bernie Sanders has a very detailed plan in place that extends to all facets of the pharmaceutical and medical industries, all in an attempt to reduce the unbelievable costs that can be incurred upon patients in the current system. Okay, so people being able to buy insulin or go see a doctor or being able to get life-saving cancer treatments without resorting to begging for money on the internet or questionable side hustles sounds like a good thing in general. But again, this video is not about what feels nice, it's about what makes sense economically. And there's actually a lot to be said to this. Currently, the US healthcare system is the most expensive in the entire world, with the average American spending $8,000 a year on the service, which by definition makes it pretty inefficient. Its costs are by far and away the most per person in the world, and yet life expectancy and many other health-related metrics are going backwards. A lot of input, but not a lot of output, is inefficiency. Of course, this is a complex system of insurance providers, pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, privately contracted doctors, and an army of medical administrators. This, in turn, is a huge job provider in the US. As of 2019, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that there are around 17 million workers in the healthcare industry, more than manufacturing, defense, or even consumer retail. This represents around 5% of the total US population and 11% of its workforce, which is far, far higher proportional representation than any other developed country in the world. These figures from the Bureau of Labor Statistics also omitted workers employed in the insurance industry, which services this medical system. A large argument against sweeping reform on the US healthcare system is that it could disturb the largest employment industry in the United States. Sure, it's inefficient, but that inefficiency is keeping millions of people employed. And this is actually a fair argument. A single-payer system does stand to streamline the medical industry to the point that many middle management facilitators will be totally redundant. If there are no other roles for them to fill, this could cause a huge jump in unemployment. The general counter-argument to this is that a single-payer system will open up healthcare to more people that will ultimately expand the industry again and mean more roles. Although, these roles are probably going to be more for practitioners rather than administrators, and so retraining programs are likely to be a large takeaway from this. The other point is that it's kind of a bit of a hypocritical argument. The same bodies that would rally strongly against social healthcare services would typically be the same groups advocating for the guiding hand of the free market. Okay, so millions of middle management types are going to be out of work because a better, more efficient system came along and made them redundant. Cool. Isn't this what you wanted? Beyond this, there is another, less direct argument that can be had about a healthcare for all system. And this goes back to a core economic concept. Whenever something is produced, economists consider the factors of production. These factors of production are land, you need somewhere to build and store your produced goods, labour, you need people to make it, and capital, you'll need tools and materials to produce things. But there's also a fourth, heavily contended factor of production, and that is entrepreneurship. Now, some economists argue that this should just be included in the labour part, but for now, let's consider it as its own thing. America is a country founded on innovation. The tales of garage entrepreneurs starting multi-billion-dollar corporations is as ingrained into the nation's psyche as the Pledge of Allegiance. But this can ultimately be stifled by the current healthcare system. Who in their right mind would risk leaving a full-time job with healthcare benefits to start a business in their backyard? Even ignoring the regular risks of starting a business, it puts the whole bankruptcy due to illness thing on top of that. It could mean many potential Microsoft and Apple computers never got started because their potential founders couldn't leave their 9-to-5 due to fears of sickness sending them bankrupt. Under a system like the one proposed by Bernie Sanders, this would be a barrier removed from the process, and perhaps ironically, his plans could build the foundation for the next generation of tech billionaires. Bernie's economic plans are outside the usual spectrum of presidential candidates. Many rivals fear that his policies are incredibly radical and can push the United States towards an outcome like Venezuela's. That has been crippled under the weight of its overly generous government welfare. But this just isn't the case. In the grand scheme of things, Bernie does not plan to move the American system far from where it is today. It will still be a nation of welfare. It will just be welfare going to people that need life-saving surgery instead of multinational corporations. It will still be a nation of government handouts. It'll just be going to people that need food rather than those who produce an excess of it. And of course, it will still be the same old America with Walmarts, McDonald's, and the entrepreneurial spirit. But it will just be an America that everyone gets a chance to participate in. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed the latest video. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. Otherwise, I will be hanging out on the Discord server for this channel for an hour after this video goes live, and we'll also be live streaming that Q&A session. Otherwise, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. I do my very best to reply to any serious questions there. Thanks guys, bye.